Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Green Man channel. Hope you're all doing good and well. So we'll move on now to the third episode of the Dark Horse Disc series. For this episode, we're going to be talking about Deftones and their eighth studio album, Gore, which I've got here with me on CD with the front cover there. And we're going to be doing a bit like what we did with the first video of the series, where we were talking about Death Magnetic by Metallica. So we're going to first of all go around the room talking about our kind of initial experience, our first experience with this album, and what our first thoughts were when we heard Deftones Gore back maybe when it came out or later, whenever you first heard it. So let's start with Hector, Chill Dude on a Couch Reviews. Hey,
So
Hector.
yeah, hey, how are you, man?
Yeah, not bad, thanks.
Good.
Hope you're both doing well, actually.
Yeah. So yeah, for anyone that knows me would know that I'm obsessed with Deftones. Deftones is one of my top five favorite bands, and uh, you know that this is the only Deftones album that I didn't buy. Back in 2016, I wasn't buying things. I was just listening them on Spotify and uh, I was saving money, so I didn't buy this one, but I did stream it a lot. And I'm a huge Deftones fan. So when this came out like almost 4 years after Kwai no Yokan. Initially, this album was supposed to come out in 2015, but I think Shino Moreno at the time he had also another band. He has lots of bands. He was playing in a band called Crosses. He had another band that they put out like an album.
Was
They
it
had
Palms?
Palms that they
That
put
was
out
a
like
good album. I liked that.
yeah, they put out in 2014 and Crosses. So Shino Moreno was quite busy. So when it came time to Kwai no Yokan, Chino Moreno and Stephen Carpenter, the guitarist, like weren't seeing too much eye to eye because Chino Moreno on this album he channeled a lot of Morrissey, and Stephen Carpenter loved Meshuggah. So it's an album that was I think the guitar player said that he didn't feel like he contributed a lot to that album, so it was more of a Chino Moreno driven album. And I think a lot of what he did in Crosses and like went into this album because it's an album that it has guitars on it, but it's more new wave-ish, if I dare to say, and more experimental. A lot of critics compared it a lot with Saturday Night Risk from 2006 because of that experimental nature and like more chill than some of the albums. And actually, when that album came out, it was the album's highest charting topping album since their eponymous album. Uh, but yeah, uh, when I first heard that they put out a teaser for Prayers and Triangle, and of course, me being a Deftones Chino Moreno fan, I had like a ear. I was like, oh yes, and that's the first single. And I thought that first single made sense because it sounded a little bit more like what they were doing in Kwai no Yokan. So it was a good transition because that's most of the other songs don't sound like that song in particular. So I think that they put out that song because it was the most familiar sounding sound to what they had put out recently. When I first heard the album in full, I wasn't disappointed, but also I felt like it was their weakest album. When I first heard it, it didn't grab me as much. And I remember that year I did a top 25, and usually Deftones was always in my first or my top five. This album I put at number 23 out of 25. So that's for me to put a Deftones album so low. That means that I didn't love it as much as their previous album. I think there's some good songs here, but I think it's not as eye-grabbing or imminent as when they released Diamond Eyes and other albums. But me being a Deftones fan, I still think it is a good album. It's just different. So those were my first thoughts when I heard Gore back in April of 2018. 16, sorry.
Cool. Okay, John, your thoughts on this one?
Deftones is a band that I listened to them a little bit, in the late 90s. They were on the radio. After that, I didn't really pay much attention to them. So this is an album I didn't about it when it first came out. I think the first time I listened to it was not too long ago, maybe. Once I started my channel, I started getting into different albums. For the Deftones, for me, it was always like the first album, Around the Fur, White Pony. But after that, I didn't really listen to that much. But being that I do have a channel, I recently do a ranking of the Deftones, so I listened to all of them. I always felt it was very different. Like they're doing being a little more experimental, doing some type of that like dream pop that is very experimental. For me, since I'm older, I'm not really familiar with like shoegaze and that type of stuff. But for me, I did like that modern rock. Hector was saying that Miranda was like channeling Morrissey. So yeah, I did hear a lot of that like 80s modern rock, post punk type of thing. I also heard like a little bit of and a few songs like that have that influence. But for me, I thought it was decent, but that's a grower. I don't think it's gonna like really, you know, you need like to take a few listens before you really get into it. It's not a very super accessible one, but I think it is very good. They are trying new things. You guys said it before. They were similar to that like Saturday Night Wrist album. So I did feel that was something they did. But I think it's good. It's just the kind of album you have to give some time to. So I think that's all I'm going to say about this album. Being that I haven't really spent a lot of time with it, but I do like it. Since I have been listening to it recently.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay, cool. Yeah, I like Deftones Gore quite a bit. I think it does, as you both say, mention a bit of shoegaze tendencies, or certainly has an ambience to it, has an ambient kind of sound in a lot of the tracks. And I do gravitate towards that style of Deftones quite a lot, which is if I was to do, I haven't done a Deftones ranking on my channel yet, but if I was, you'd probably find albums like Koi no Yo Can, Saturday Night Risk quite high up on mine, just because I like that style of them quite a bit. And I really like Chino's singings when you have those singing when you have those kind of tracks too. Um, but this is a bit of a mix. It's got some of that shoegazy sound or ambient sound, but it also has a bit of the sort of hardcore style of Deftones on here too. It's got a bit of a mix of the two. So when critics compare it to Saturday Night Wrist, I can see some similarity there. Not entirely, but I can see a bit of that. So maybe it's like a little bit. Some might see it as a sequel to that album. I don't know, but yeah, it's a pretty good album. I think it came about 16th in my top 20 of 2016, so a little higher than your Hector's. Um,
I'm
but
too
yeah,
critical.
I dig it quite a bit. And we will come on to. I was about to go into favorite tracks. I don't want to go into favorite tracks just yet. We'll get onto that in a minute. But yeah, I do like it. I had a good 2016 was a pretty good year for me. So I think when I think about when I was first listening to this album, which was about the time it was released, I have good memories with it as well, which always sometimes affects how you then look back at the album, even if it's not a perfect album. If you have good memories of it, I think it can mean you sometimes see it in a slightly different light. So I think that's also the case with me with this one. So we'll move on to the second round of the video, if you like. Now we'll each talk about why we think the album might be a little bit underrated, and we kind of touched a touch on that already. And also name our three favorite tracks from this one, which will be an interesting one, I think, because it's an interesting album. So we'll go back to Hector.
Yes, of course. So why do I think it's an underrated Dark Horse album? I think a lot of people probably dismiss the album because, of a more lighter sound, but there's some great hidden songs on it, great gems. I was listening to this recently, and I was quite enjoying it. I also think for Deftones, maybe this is the Deftones album that would sound more like if Chino Moreno put out a solo album. Because Chino Moreno was like the sole focus of this album. Like usually when Deftones write, they write around Stephen Carpenter's like style of playing. You know, he plays that 7-string guitar, and he loves Meshuggah, so he likes to put that into Deftones. But Chino Moreno actually, if you see interviews of him growing up, metal wasn't his first love. He loves new wave. He likes pop. He likes other styles, and that's why I think that's what he brings to the Deftones, and that's why the Deftones sound is so different, because they mix that with the harder, and they make a sound that it's really cool with all the styles that they bring. And on this one, there's less of like they shun away from when they had that new metal tag. So maybe all fans of Deftones would hear this and would say like, what is this? Like, but like you, Tom, I also like their more shoegazy experimental sound. And I like that they did that here. My favorite tracks are, I love Prayers and Triangles, which is the lead single. I love also Doomed User, which was another one of the singles. It's one of the more harder tracks. And Phantom Bride, which features Jerry Cantrell from Alice in Chains doing a sweet solo.
Brilliant.
And that's almost at the end of the album, and I don't think that track is like the solo from Jerry Cantrell on that song is amazing, and I just love it that they brought Alice in Chains, because that would be great. And I know, getting off topic, but at that year or some years before, there was a tour that I wish I could have gone. It was Deftones, Alice in Chains, and Mastodon.
Ooh.
Yeah, and I'm like, oh my God, that was
yeah.
I think that was a few years ago, and that's a tour that to this day I'm like, oh my God, I would have loved going to that tour. Like, but yeah, that's why I think it's a dark horse, because maybe a lot of people like dismiss it because it doesn't have that like crunchy like guitar Deftones sound, and it's more of a mellow affair. And that's why it gets like looked over, and I think a lot of people like shit on it, just to do it. Like, okay, it is malware, but it is good. So I think it's an album that it's a grower, and I think I like it more now than when it came out. I think when it came out, I liked it, but maybe I felt like, oh, this sounds more like Chino's Other Sides projects instead of Deftones, and I wanted more Deftones sound. But now when I was re-listening to it this week, I'm like, with like fresh ears, I hadn't listened to it in a while except the singles. I felt like, well, like this sounds great to me.
Cool. Yeah, good stuff. John?
Okay. Yeah, I'm pretty much going to say a lot of the same things. For me, I was somebody who I listened to a lot of new metal, in the early 2000s, and I do like that sound where they have those like chunky guitars, almost those like staccato riffs. So
yeah.
And what I remember of the Deftones, I always remember them being like that. Those albums, like the Around the Fur album and their first album. So on this one, I think it's a dark horse album, and it's underrated just because it's a little more complex. I think they took a chance. They got a little more experimental, and there's good stuff on here, but it is missing a lot of those like chunky riffs. The guitars, they create more of this like big like wall of sound, a lot of more like ambient sounds as opposed to those like maybe they tune down the guitar, they'll tune it down a step, and they'll play a lot of those like staccato riffs and those like bar chords. And here that they play like these like more like full chords. So I thought that was interesting, and I like how they brought in like that modern rock, sound. I thought I also like how they kind of brought in like the grunge sound on a few songs. So let me go into the songs. Um, I'll be mentioning some of the same ones as Hector. For example, Prayers Triangles. That's just a really great album opener. It's different, it's more like the heavy guitars don't really overpower the song. They just like use them like when they're needed. So I like that one. I like track number 7 called Xenon. I like that one because it reminded me of like grunge, specifically Garden from their like Loud Love or Bad Motorfinger era. Like that of like guitar riff, that was what I got from that song.
Yeah.
So if you think about it, yeah, that reminded me of that. So it's kind of like a complex riff, like the way like Soundgarden used to do, where they would kind of play around with like different like time signatures. So I like that one, Xenon, and I would have to say Phantom Bride with Jerry Cantrell because I was listening to it, and when you're streaming it, the title says Phantom Bride. So I'm listening and I'm thinking, I wonder where Jerry comes in. I wonder if he does vocals on it. And I'm listening, all of a sudden you hear that solo, and I'm like, Jerry. Like it's Jerry Cantrell with that guitar solo style. It's almost like an Alice in Chains solo, and they incorporated it into that song. And I chose that as my third one, and that's it. Those are my three. I know I repeated 2 that Hector did, but just there are some really good songs here. So that's all I have about that.
Yeah. No, good pick. And inevitably, I'm going to say Phantom Bride is one of mine as well. It just has, I mean, you have a bit of the different elements of Deftones are all great, but then you add in the Jerry Cantrell solo and that enormous stomping riff right at the end as well, right? It's just brilliant. It's like just got everything I love about Deftones plus Jerry Cantrell. So for me, it's one of my all-time favorite Deftones tracks as well. I think that one. But anyway, so why I think this is a dark horse as well, just to address that, I guess. I think it's a bit, Deftones have a really consistent discography. And I think the reason that this one is overlooked is probably a lot because of that, because they have a lot of great albums like White Pony, Diamond Eyes, Around the Fur. Their first album's pretty awesome as well. I think, I only listened to that one fairly recently. And I think that those sort of albums in the later era, just naturally sometimes with fans or people that are much more familiar with that kind of big era of Deftones around the sort of new metal years, if you want to call them that they tend to forget that a lot of the later Deftones era albums like Call No You Can and this one, and Ohms as well from a couple of years back, wasn't it? So they're all pretty good albums as well. So I just think it falls into that category of being a late Deftones album that's at risk of being, not thought of much by people, I guess. That would be the main reason anyway. My favorite tracks, so I've already said Phantom Bride pretty much, and that to me would be in my top 10, I think, Deftones tracks of all time. I think it's brilliant. And it might be because Jerry Cantrell's solo is amazing as well. I really like Acid Hologram, the second one. It's just got that sort of cool riff in it, hasn't it? And I'm going to say Heart's Wires has that really cool introduction and gentle lead in with the nice lead guitar and stuff. So I think I'm going to go Heart's Wires as my third one as well. So we'll do a final round now.
Yeah. That Hearts and Wires, I think it's a follow-up like to Prayers and Triangles.
Yeah.
They're like that. Deftones are like a thinking man's new metal band, if you will, even though I don't think of them as that category. Yeah.
I mean, they get lumped in with that a bit, don't they? But they're definitely not really new metal. I mean, a couple of their albums have that heavier, slightly more new metal sound, but sort of more alternative 90s sort of leaning, I think, in a lot of their stuff, or still pretty heavy. So let's go around the room one more time for where we think Gore would fall in the discography of Deftones. Where would you rank it amidst their, what we've got 9 studio albums for Deftones, right? So where would you rank this one? So we'll start with Hector again.
So actually, this album wouldn't be in my top, in my bottom or top either. I would say out of 9 albums, I would put this between a 6 and a 7. Even that I'm not I love Deftones, but I'm not a huge fan of their first album. I think it's okay, but I think it's kind of overrated a little bit. Their first album, it's they were like, the songs, they're harder, but I don't think they're as good as like Then You Go Around the Fur, and it's like leaps and bounds. Yeah. But I would say like a 6. Sometimes it just depends on the day. Because like I think it's good, but to me, it would depend on the day. But I think like a 6 or 7. It's not their best album, but it's not their worst. And to me, they have no bad albums. So it would just be which one is my favorite. So that's how I would rank Gore, which is something I think interesting is that they named it Gore, and you have some flamingos in the cover. So that's like when you see the flamingos, you're like, but it's named Gore. Like, it was weird because that album cover like makes sense with the type of music. But when they name an album, when I first heard that the album was going to be called Gore, I think my initial reaction was, Gore, it has to be like super hard. And we got the opposite. And yeah, that album cover. And when I saw the album cover, I'm like, interesting. Like, when I think of Gore, I don't think of flamingos flying. So, yeah, it's an interesting use of an album title. But yeah, I would say 6 or 7, depending on the day and the mood.
Yeah, I don't know where that album title came from, actually. I was trying to find out some of the...
Well, there's a song called Gore on it.
Yeah, true.
But don't know the inspiration for the album title.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Well, for me, I would say somewhere around like a 7, because for me, those the more like shoegazy or dreamier ambient types of albums, like no kind, or I'm not saying I'm saying that right, and the other one, Silent. Those ones are at my bottom. But when I say bottom, I don't say they're bad albums. Yeah. The Deftones really have a solid discography. I think those are just the ones that I prefer the least. So, but out of those 3 I just mentioned, I think this one might be. I think I always just, for me, the Deftones, I come from just because of my age, I guess, that like 90s music, just when it's a little heavier into that 2000 metal. I was listening to a lot of music back then. So I gravitate towards those types of albums, like the first one. I thought just because it had that like heavier, like raw sound. So that's when I did my ranking, I think that one was fairly high. It wasn't number 1, but was up there a little bit. And things like Diamond Eyes, I thought that was a really great album. That was like kind of like, the songwriting was really good in that album. So I like Diamond Eyes fairly high. But going back to this one, it is like the more like ambient albums I did have more towards the end. So for me, it would be out of 9.
Yeah, I think I would be actually pretty similar. I was wondering whether you both kind of rank it right at the bottom. I was thinking, will it be at the bottom? For me, I think it's similar, actually. I guess my favorite Deftones albums are probably Diamond Eyes, White Pony, and even possibly Saturday Night Rest, just because I really love that album.
That was very underrated, in my opinion.
I mean, that could actually have been another topic or another video, is Saturday Night Rest, maybe. But yeah, I like. I think this would be maybe for me 6th or even 5th in their catalogue, in their ranking. I would have 5th or 6th, I think. I've never been big on their self-titled record really, and Ohms I sort of sometimes like it, sometimes I'm not. So it's weird with Ohms. I can't make my mind up about that one, and that's their most recent one. Koi no Yokan is a good one as well, and that will probably be 6th or 7th. So I think this would be 5th or 6th for me at the moment. Cool. All right. Well, I think we are nearly sort of at the end of the video. So just want to say quickly, though, before we wrap things up properly, to everybody that's watching the video, don't forget to subscribe to the channels of my guests. So to JC Rock and Metal Reviews. He does a really great and thorough channel, I think, with lots of really good reviews and rankings of probably lots. If you like your classic rock and metal in particular, or even your more modern stuff, do check out his channel and drop a sub to him. And also for Hector's channel, Chill Dude on a Couch Reviews, also make sure you sub to his channel as well. He does a lot of really good reviews too, similar to all of our channels, I guess, but he has some really good interviews as well. He sort of digs out these really interesting underground acts as well and interviews with them too. So I'll drop links into the description box, both their channels, of course. Do drop me a sub as well if you can spare one. And otherwise, from me, take care, everybody. To our next collab, we are planning to do Alice in Chains and Black Is Way to Blue next time, all being well, about this time next Sunday. Take care, everybody. From me, bye for now.
Bye.